Hi, this is Garibay, and today I want to talk about. Let's have an open and honest conversation about Dungeons and Dragons canon. Canon is really important today. I don't think people understand just how incredibly important canon is, but we're going to have a full discussion about Dungeons and Dragons canon because I think Dungeons and Dragons has reached a tipping point on canon that no other intellectual property in the world has achieved, and nobody noticed it but me. But I'm going to show it to you, and then I want to discuss it. All right? Okay. I'm eager to see your feedback in the comments below, or a response video. All right, let's jump into it. Okay, so let me explain what happened. Okay, because something really extraordinary has happened on Dungeons and Dragons canon. All right. So first of all, Dungeons and Dragons is a modern intellectual property. There's a lot there. Okay, it's important because before we really discuss Dungeons and Dragons canon, we need to discuss. We really need to discuss modern intellectual property canon. All right, so let me break it down. I'm going to give you the. So I've been thinking a lot about Dungeons and Dragons canon. And in order to understand Dungeons and Dragons canon, I needed to kind of set the rules for. I needed to acknowledge the current rules, in my humble opinion, for modern intellectual properties. Here's the rules. Okay. All right. First of all, every company in the world that matters today is an intellectual property company, right? And I think a lot and here's a good example. A company would say, hey, we make brake rotors. We don't have intellectual properties. You do, right? So you are telling the story of your creator. You are telling the story of your brand. You have stories that are connected, and your product has stories. All of that is intellectual property. It is an intellectual property, no different than Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is far more than a game. It is an intellectual property, right? And I think every company in the world is going to realize, first of all, every life coach is like, you have a brand as a person. People hate it. They don't like to hear it. It's true. Like, you have a brand as a person, all right? And I think and every company's going to need to put on their big girl pants and realize we are an intellectual property company, right? And a lot of companies are like, we're a shoe company. We don't need tech. Every company needs tech now, right? Every company that matters today is an intellectual property company, in my humble opinion, okay? Now, here's where it gets sticky. Companies cannot control and companies cannot understand canon. Absolutely can't. Every intellectual property has canon, okay? That canon is controlled and understood by the intellectual properties community, not by its owner. They are distinct, right? And pay attention, right? Because people they want to keep it at the shadow level, but if you go to understand D&D canon, you cannot keep it at the shallow level. It is outrageously complex. Dungeons and Dragons is a filter, and what it is filtering today is the world's most charismatic, confident, intelligent people, period. And the things that happen on Dungeons and Dragons are so incredibly complicated that its history and its politics and the religion that's near it and the culture that's near it, all of it get very, very mixed, right? And and by the way, you're like, Dungeons and Dragons and religion? Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons has had a long history of being discussed by multiple religions, and it has relationships with different religions, right? So this is the deep end of the pool, right? So every company in the world that matters is an intellectual property company. Intellectual properties, canon controls the intellectual property. Companies cannot control or even understand canon. The intellectual property communities, the communities connected to each individual properties, actually control and actually understand the canon of those intellectual properties. In my humble opinion, these are rock solid rules that are simply not acknowledged today, okay? And they are rules that concern modern intellectual properties. Dungeons and Dragons is a modern intellectual property. So because of the complication behind canon, because companies can neither control nor understand canon, right? Individuals can, but companies can't, right? What happens is we have arrived at with Dungeons and Dragons Canon at a place that absolutely no one individual person intended, and the location we ended up is shocking, right? And now, how did we end up here? Well, the reality is, politics, religion, and culture have been impacting modern intellectual properties for decades, and people didn't understand this relationship. And politics, religion, and culture are pushing intellectual properties the way the wind pushes a hot air balloon, right? So a hot air balloon is the perfect. So think of each intellectual property as a hot air balloon, right? And where they end up is not up to the driver, right? You have a little bit of control. You can push it here, you can push it there, you can stop, you can rise. But the reality is you don't control where a hot air balloon lands, or you really don't. You don't. Better way to say it is you don't control a hot air balloon's destination. You can't, right? And that's exactly what's happening with D&D Canon. D&D Canon has floated, right, to a destination that no one ever expected. There was intention in traveling. There was always intention from everybody involved in the process to move. But nobody knew where the destination would be. And Dungeons & Dragons, because it is a filter for the most charismatic, confident, smartest people in the world, that's who orbit it and continue to orbit it and are drawn into its orbit, right? Because it has thousands of pages of canon. Like, nobody who isn't super educated, super smart, super charismatic, and super confident remain connected to it, right? Confident, you can't even be a dungeon master if you can't publicly speak. You need confidence for that, right? Charisma, if you have no charisma, you're dead in the water as a dungeon master. Nobody's going to want to sit at your table, right? And intelligent, if there's thousands of pages of canon, you literally have to be intelligent to understand Dungeons and Dragons, its history, its rules, all of that. Okay, all right. Now let's get all the way there. Okay. Here's what happened with Dungeons & Dragons. This all started, 1974. Gary Gygax invents Dungeons & Dragons, gives it to the world as a gift, as a blessing, all right? 1986, Gary Gygax says, Lorraine Williams, carry the ball forward because I have failed commercially. I was a great creative. I was a terrible commercial. And I have really cocked this 6 ways to Sunday. Lorraine Williams, please take the ball further. She does. Lorraine Williams controls. She was the first female CEO. She was the CEO of TSR, and she built Gary Gygax birthed Dungeons & Dragons. Lorraine Williams made it valuable, right? She took it from 1986 to 1997 and did nothing but inject pure gold into its veins, right? And when she was done with it, it was worth $65 million in 1997, right? And the person who bought it was Peter Atkinson, the president of Wizards of the Coast. Okay, so Peter Atkins comes along, and what he does is he from 1993 he creates Magic the Gathering. He turns on the money faucet. USD starts spouting out of MTG, out of Magic the Gathering, by the millions. They couldn't print it fast enough. That's not a joke. That's a literal truth. Okay, all right. He has millions rolling in. You know the first thing he did 2 years after it? He's got this burgeoning company that's making millions of dollars. You know what he does? He's like, first order of business, 2 years in. Like, he's like, now that we're rich, I ain't buying a yacht. I'm buying the most valuable thing in the world, Dungeons and Dragons, right? So when the money faucet turns on for Peter Atkinson, he immediately, in 1995, he calls up Lorraine, please sell me Dungeons and Dragons. She says no, right? 2 years later, she says you can buy it for $35 million cash, and you have to absorb the $30 million debt. So Peter Atkinson buys it for $35 million cash, and he absorbs $30 million in debt. Okay. At this point, Wizards of the Coast owns Dungeons and Dragons. The merger of Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering begins. This is where we arrive. Now, what is the destination we arrived at? Dungeons and Dragons, in my humble opinion, is the intellectual property on the planet that has the widest, most expansive collection of multi billion characters that has ever existed in humanity in the history of humanity, because of the merger of Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. Dungeons and Dragons is incredibly important. It rewrote the narrative engine. Humans tell stories in fundamentally different ways because of Dungeons and Dragons. Peter Atkinson then said, I'm going to rewrite how canon is developed, right? And he began mixing the canon of Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons, I think as early as 1995. I think Magic the Gathering's design was impacted by an intention to buy Dungeons and Dragons in 1995. So 2 years before Peter Atkinson even owned it, I think there was design that went into Magic the Gathering, which is canon to this day, in my humble opinion, all the way to where they bought it, and once Peter Atkinson bought Magic the Gathering, the combination of these products has been non-stop. The design team of MTG and the design team of D&D have been doing so much work to combine these projects and products and really merge them into one. And more specifically, in my opinion, Peter Atkinson intended from 1995 on for Magic the Gathering to simply be a D&D supplement, which I think it is. And I really feel that the real product is Dungeons and Dragons with Magic the Gathering as simply a supplement of Dungeons and Dragons, right? Now, I know I'm way down the road on this. A lot of people don't understand this yet, right? Because people just don't understand what's happening, and nor should they, because this is the deepest end of the pool, and no one is farther out on what can actually happen with the canon of a modern intellectual property than D&D. More has happened on D&D than any other intellectual property in the world. Okay, by the time we're done talking, I think you're going to understand that. Okay, so listen carefully. Here we go. All right. So, Plane Shift, Dominaria, Kaladesh, Innistrad, well over half a dozen Magic the Gathering worlds are bloop. Magic the Gathering realms are literally brought directly into Dungeons and Dragons through the Plane Shift modules. Then the D&D design team says, okay, Gilda Ravnica, Theros, Strixhaven. Strixhaven is huge. Strixhaven is canon in Magic the Gathering. That is non-debatable. Strixhaven is canon in D&D, non-debatable. The bridge between these two worlds is fully built. Okay? So arguably, and I do argue this, in my humble opinion, anything that is connected to a Magic the Gathering world is connected to Dungeons & Dragons world through Strixhaven, right? And also a whole bunch of other connections. In addition to that, Wizards goes like, in case you're not paying attention, watch this. We're going to take, Adventures in. We're going to take Forgotten Realms and make it an official Dungeons & Dragons product. Oh, I'm sorry, not an official. They take the Forgotten Realms and they make it an official Magic the Gathering product, right? They actually said it's not canon, and this is where we arrive, okay? And actually, that's just the connect. So, you don't even need. You don't even. The Forgotten Realms doesn't even matter because the Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons are already connected through Strixhaven. Both canon. It's a canon setting in both worlds. The bridge is complete. Okay. Now, Magic the Gathering. Once you connect Magic the Gathering to Dungeons and Dragons, inarguably, right, with Strixhaven, they're connected, right? What do you do now with Fortnite, right? Let me explain something. Fortnite gets a secret release drop. It is printed with a bog standard actual MTG back so that you can take your Fortnite cards, your MTG Fortnite cards, and put them right next to your same back Dritz Do'Urden, and your same back Space Marine, and your same back Dominaria card, and your same back, it's all the same back, all put together, right? Standard Magic back, right? And they're like, this is one cohesive thing, right? Here's where it gets interesting. Fortnite has a card called the Cube. The Secret Lair Fortnite MTG drop has a card called the Cube. The Cube. Right under the Cube, it says Planar Bridge. Planar Bridge is in Kaladesh. That card is in Kaladesh. Kaladesh is already connected to Magic the Gathering and D&D through the Plane Shift module. That means Naomi Osaka, Darth Vader, Spider-Man, Batman, literally 1,400 different characters spanning innumerable, like spanning literally 100 intellectual properties, drop directly, in my humble opinion, directly into canon. Now here's the thing, okay? This all happened because the balloon was flowing. The suits were excited. The suits on Disney's side were excited. The suits on Epic's side were excited. The suits on Watsy's side were excited. They're like, money, 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 sign, sign, sign. Okay? And then they give you the product, right? Then the artists are excited, and they put the Soul Ring in Dominaria, in Warhammer, in Fortnite, right? Like they put the Soul Ring in Dominaria, Warhammer, and in Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's just the connections are everywhere, right? By promotion, by packaging, by the text of the cards, by the art of the cards. All of this is connected, right? And in my opinion, anyone who looks at it is going to say logically all this is canon. By narrative, logic, lore, promotion, and packaging, this is all canon. What's happened now is all the suits realize what they did. They built the most expansive canon world in Dungeons and Dragons, and they didn't even realize they did it. The question is, are you as a dungeon master and you as a Dungeons and Dragons player smart enough to see it? I am, right? I bought all those products because I wanted them in one canon cohesive world. Now, Wizards of the Coast and all the companies connected are freaking out and getting upset and getting very worried that they really built the most expansive canon world with more multi-billion-dollar characters connected in Dungeons and Dragons than anywhere else, right? But they're like, oh my gosh, we did this and we didn't even realize it, right? And so now they're going back and they're saying they're not canon. The most perfect example of this is Adventures in Forgotten Realms. It had a pre-release, it had the same back, it had every single signature of a standard canon Magic Gathering world. And there's an article sitting on Wizards of the Coast site that says this isn't canon. And the reason why is they need it to not be canon, right? And the reality is, they don't, in my humble opinion, they don't even have the right to determine canon. A company doesn't understand canon. There's no legal ability for them to declare canon. Communities declare canon. I think the D&D community declares canon. And I think it's important that we claim our right to use Spider-Man in Dungeons & Dragons because they built it with the promotion, the packaging, the art, the text of the cards. And it's important that we take the gold bullion that was given to us and keep it, right? That is my humble opinion. I think it's really important that, we're not like OSC. Like, OSC didn't do any of this work. They didn't build a canon property by promotion, package, text, and art, and then have some suit come out and say, this isn't canon, right? And the reality is we're on the edge of this. Dungeons & Dragons is at the very start of this. We are the farthest out. We decide this. And we're going to decide this for every other intellectual property. Let's claim what ours, right? Dungeons & Dragons is the most expansive world, bar none, in my humble opinion. Do you agree or disagree? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing and have a wonderful millennium. And have all the worlds that's been given to you.